The views expressed by the speakers of CamaPlan podcasts are those of the speakers only and may not reflect those of Cama, its members, or employees. Cama does not guarantee the accuracy of information provided by these speakers. Professional advisors should be consulted before implementing any options presented. Cama absolutely does not endorse or recommend any individual or organization, including the speakers. Cama, its members, and employees do not accept liability for losses and/or damages arising from errors or omissions within, reliance upon, or any use of the information provided by the speakers. Individuals are strongly encouraged by Cama to conduct their own due diligence before making any investment choices. Cama does not act as, nor offer the services of, an investment advisor, CPA, realtor, or attorney. If tax, legal, accounting, investment, or other similar expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional should be sought. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Road to Financial Freedom, a podcast that allows experts to share their stories and secrets to unlocking their financial independence. This podcast is brought to you by CamaPlan, a self-directed IRA administrator in Ambler, Pennsylvania, focused on educating investors with different ways to grow their retirement savings faster through alternative investments. And of course, we continue to record this podcast remotely today. I'm Jess Jones, CamaPlan team member and your podcast host. This week's guest got started as an investor after beginning in the real estate business over a decade ago. He expanded his knowledge and expertise to build one of the largest wholesaling companies in Philadelphia at the time. He also created Atlas Property Management, which was sold several years ago to TCS Management, and is currently an active partner in Hard Money Bankers, where he has been part of over 1,000 transactions to date. So please welcome Ian Walsh to our podcast today. Ian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get started and jump right in. Tell me some more about your background, where you grew up, went to school, what you studied, where you were born, all those things that made up your early life before you got started as an investor.
Sure. Yeah. I before I was an investor, if you go real far back into like high school, I've always been like fairly untraditional with my approach to making money, or I guess life in general. And I've always loved money, just loved going after it, and I've always had an affinity for it. So in high school, I remember that basically the second half of my senior year, I had a guy that I found out that was building like a website business. And this was back when like 1999, like the internet was not exactly what it is today. And,
right.
I knew he was making good money each month. And I said, well, how do I do that? So I just befriended him and met with the guy. And next thing you know, I'm building sites with him. And, I ended up skipping the second half of my senior year in high school to build this. And, I ended up going to college, and we ended up parting ways, and he ended up taking the business. I didn't really know much at that time, and I ended up finding out later that he sold it for $1 million. And,
wow.
Some people will be bitter, and I really wasn't. For me, it was like, okay, lesson learned. I understand, that's on me. Like I should have been able to, if that was that important to me, I would have handled it. And I'm still, the guy he's a good guy. I have no hard feelings. He took the business as he should have, and ran with it. So, then that was a good lesson for me to understand for many reasons. And then I went to college and I was not a studious, very good student. I went to Penn State, ended up entering into like a college painting company where you run your own business for the summer. So I did that, and then I actually worked my way up that ladder during school. And by the time I was going to graduate, I was like the VP of the East Coast, and it was weird because I was like 22, and I was like, what does this even mean? But I still, it wasn't satisfying for what I really wanted to do. And I read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, which a lot of people read, but I read the excerpt in there where he'd said, he could wholesaled a property for made 40 grand in like an afternoon. And I said, how do I do that? So, I just, at that time, there was really not a lot of resources on wholesaling. So
right.
I ended up just looking into it, understanding the logistics of wholesaling. And then, I said, I can do this. So went out, put a property under contract. That worked out. Ended up, working in a small area of New Jersey, and outgrew that, and then went into Philadelphia and said, okay, I got to hit a bigger stage, and ended up calling a sign on like a We Buy Homes to Fix sign. Called a guy, said, hey, what are you doing? He goes, I'm wholesaling. I said, oh, me too. So we both, I said, you want to meet at a diner? And we met, talked for like an hour and said, you want to be partners? He said, cool. So we went there. There's my new partner. And we never signed a document, but we ended up building, at the time, what was one of the largest wholesaling companies in the Philadelphia region. And, but it was very volatile, wholesaling in general. If anybody that wholesales, it tends to be volatile unless you're like a mega player. Now there's huge companies out there, doing way bigger than we did. But, in order to steady that out, we decided that the best thing to do was to build a property management company, because that seems like an easy way to make money and steady income. It is definitely it's steady, but it is not an easy way to make money. But I got too far into it, learned it, and said, I've got a lot I want to see through on this. And we built quite a large management company during that time after wholesaling. And then I sold it to the company in Center City. And I had two silent partners in lending that were in our management company that were lending at the time in Maryland. And I said, hey, I understand, I've been investing for so long. I get this. Let's bring some capital up here. So we did, and just due to my background and knowing what the market looks like, we ended up deploying a bunch of private capital in the Philadelphia space. So right now we are in all of Pennsylvania, all of New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and DC. That's really our arm span. And at this point in time, I don't see myself venturing into any other, unless something's really appealing and really not, really headache free. I don't see myself jumping into anything else. I love what I do, lending. So.
Oh, that's awesome. So, I mean, you have a very interesting background in that, you have been driven a lot by, like you said, growing up, and even still now, I think, understanding money and learning more about money and how, there are less than other than traditional ways to make it, or alternative ways to make it. So I think it's really interesting, the all the different little turns and people you've met or lessons you learned early on that have informed, where you're at now, Ian. So could you just break down, I think, for some of our listeners who may be listening, myself included, I come from a liberal arts background, so some of these terms are always new to me as well. What exactly wholesaling or hard money lending is? How would you define them?
So wholesaling is when you take a property, you put it under contract to buy. So if I want to buy a property from you, I put it under contract for, let's say, $10,000. And then let's say I know I have investors that will pay $20,000 for that property. What I'll do is I'll put the property under contract for me to have the right to purchase or assign. And then what I typically would do, you assign the rights of the contract, not the actual property, but the rights of the contract to close. And then it gives the new investor the right to close at $20,000 on the project due to the assignment clause. And there's a $10,000 spread between the $10,000 you're selling it to me for and the $10,000 assignment fee that the other person's paying. And that's how much you make on the assignment. So that's a contract assignment. A lot of investors do that. And then as far as private money lending or hard money lending, it's quick liquidity for flippers, commercials, bridge loans, not your owner occupied scenarios. It's very much for investment properties to close. We can close in 24 hours. We don't use appraisals. It's nothing like a bank. It's very, very much based on, you have to know your market. I know how to underwrite because of all my experience. So, that kind of stuff is really, really relevant.
Great. And so how would you, how do the two things in terms of like real estate, property management, those are definitely a little bit more tangible of an asset, and that, people are going in and working on the property, things like that. And hard money lending, you describe as liquid. How do they, differ? How are they similar? Where does the overlap come into play in terms of, where your experience from before helped you in terms of getting into hard money lending now?
Well, where my experience before helped me. I'm sorry, I missed the end of your question there.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. So the in terms of real estate versus hard money lending now, you describe some differences and some similarities. So how are they different and how are they similar? How is the real estate end of what you did in the beginning informed what you do now for hard money lending?
Well, so the marketplaces are much different just due to technology. So what a wholesaler does nowadays is way different. I have friends that wholesale $30,000 and $40,000 assignment fees like nothing. And back then, 20 grand was like a huge assignment fee. The way that you can just streamline a business in general is really like just due to the internet technology and everything like that, is far superior than it was, and more efficient, which is good. As far as what, the transition from what we're bringing along from one business to the next, I mean, it was multiple skills that had to be developed. It was definitely I didn't come out of the business womb in a position of just, utter dominance. It was a lot of learning,
right,
and mistakes and so forth. So, one of the biggest things that I would say, or biggest functions of, when I built the wholesaling business to begin with, which was the first business I really built on my own, I had an understanding of like business runnings from the college painting company times, but really building it on my own, I had to understand cash flow, payroll, overhead. I learned that end of it more so than the skill set of, putting a property under contract. What I also took from that, though, at the time was, I was doing this in 2008 when there was no cash no lending on the streets anymore. The world was ending. So the only people buying were your cash investors. And, so I met a ton of, I was wholesaling so many properties. So I met so many strong players at the time because they all came out of the woodworks. So I learned how to really look for a deal and what a real deal looks like, because these guys are not overpaying. Like, we just came from and we're still kind of in a bubble where, people are coming in paying out of state with their IRAs, these exorbitant, crazy prices on properties that don't make sense. And you don't have your local cash buyers paying those prices. Those guys know when to buy, when to wait, and it's just an overpaid market. So I learned how to find a deal in that market. So I took the business skill set then and then moved it into the property management development, and really honed in like understanding how to run a business and build a business and systems and so forth. But, along the way, the skill set of like underwriting deals was really being developed in understanding what a deal looks like, what a good borrower looks like, that kind of stuff in just the actual logistics of wholesaling. And then, so between those two skill sets, that led eventually to where I am in lending today and building a business and understanding, what a real deal or a market looks like.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk some more about, you bring up one of the very earliest lessons that you learned in, you weren't better when the company was sold for $1 million. Your partner had kept the company and you had moved on. But were there any other early lessons that you learned as an investor, or any, successes, failures? You feel free to talk about any of them, but any specific stories that stick out to you in terms of, okay, well, this informs the way I still strategize or look at money, or the way I work with clients today?
Yeah. So I would say, some things are always ingrained in, due to probably me losing and failing in certain areas, but and then figuring it out would be really the element of protect money and buy low. Those are really the biggest. Like, a lot of people think they're in real estate for money, or they say they are, but then what they're looking for is something else out of the business that they're looking for emotionally, or to overcome, or to compensate for something else. Mm-hmm. At some point, I'm sure that was the case for me. Maybe it was, display my ego that I'm a real estate investor. I don't know. But, I got over that. Once money, leaves you, or, you make mistakes with it, or you don't treat it right, because you're using it to fulfill, you think you're doing it to make money, but you're really doing it to fulfill your ego, or whatever whatever self-conscious thing you're trying to fulfill. When your goals are misaligned, because it should always be making money in this business. Like, that's what we're here for. Otherwise, go get a hobby. So, because there's a lot less expensive ways to go prove your ego somewhere else. So once that gets out of the way, that was my biggest lesson, and really stripped down my ego. In terms of, like, I definitely had one, quite some time. And I know it just, when I look back, it just created a lot of resistance and a lot of, just complication that didn't need to be there if I just stayed focused 100% of the money. Now, fortunately, I was always risk adverse, so I didn't end up losing my shirt at any point. I certainly made some mistakes. Mm-hmm. But, by the time I figured out, okay, just like the ego, we strip the ego down, let it go, let it die. Just focus on the financial end of it and don't worry about anything else. And that was probably my biggest lesson to date, is when you stay focused on the right goals and the reasons you're here, it makes a big difference. it's a really personal analysis that you have to do on yourself.
Yeah, I think that I really like that response. I want to say that because I think a lot of people are not so willing to admit, that there is an ego component to a lot of these things, especially with investing. So I think being able to really take, like you said, that self-assessment and understand, are my goals in the right place is a huge sign of, I think, maturity as like a person and as an investor. So, I think that's something that a lot of people, especially young people, probably need to hear. So thanks for sharing that response.
Yeah, no problem. I think, honestly, like everybody has an ego. Like that's not, it's just a matter of what your ego is, what you're applying it to, how big it is, and, what you're using it for. Mine was probably, too big for, it was too, everybody's is too big. If you don't have one, it's just way easier to operate. So, that was a pretty big pivotal moment though in my life it took a couple traumatic scenarios in business and outside of business to really make me look in the mirror and be like, what are you doing? And, hopefully it doesn't take people that much, what I went through to recognize that. But when I came out the other side of that, it was like being reborn in business. It was just so much easier and fluid to move. And, but in real estate, you see it all the time. Real estate is full. I managed, so many properties from property management. So I saw all kinds of egos and why people were in the business. You learn to spot it. You learn to see why people, hey, like you're here because of this part of your ego. You're here because this part of your ego. And then sometimes you really end up seeing the guys that are really there for the money, and you go, okay, that's, somebody that'll probably be here for the long haul. And, it's just part of it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that again. It's I think that it's going to be helpful for a lot of people to hear and maybe take that assessment of themselves before they start getting involved with things that maybe, that their heart's not in the right place for. So I think that's a good way to take a look at everything. So I want to talk some more about Hard Money Bankers, what you guys do at Hard Money Bankers, who's a typical client of Hard Money Bankers, and how do they benefit from money lending and money borrowing, things like that.
So a typical borrower would probably be like a fix and flip. Somebody's coming to buy a house, they want to renovate it, and then they want to flip it. That's going to be your typical borrower. But we definitely work with, people that buy and hold, or people that buy and, commercial bridge loans or pull cash out of their properties. But it's really, any localized real investor attached to real estate is what we're interested in. That's who we're dealing with. Just no owner occupied scenarios. That's the gist of it.
Gotcha. And then do you participate with any clients who do this type of investing and have self-directed IRAs?
Yeah, sure. I've actually worked with Ryan on a project recently. So it's certainly common. It certainly happens. If it pretty real IRAs, self-directed IRAs, and real estate really come hand in hand pretty often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. We see a lot of it. It's definitely probably one of the most popular investments that people, even when they just start out with self-directed IRAs or they've just been introduced to the idea, because I think, we hear a lot of, only 2% of the population really knows what a self-directed IRA is or knows about it. So people who just get started are usually familiar with real estate and things like bigger pockets, those sorts of things. So we do see that a lot. But
sure.
So you guys are currently lending out in Maryland, DC, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Jersey. So how did, you talked about how you've expanded into all of those different areas of the country in terms of, how hard money lending works. You describe a lot of the fix and flips, sometimes, quicker transactions, those sorts of things. How exactly does lending, does it differ in each of those states? Is it easier to kind of keep things close, like everything in the Northeast region or the East Coast? Or how does it work in terms of, distance, time, and, differences in state laws or things like that?
So we each have our areas that when I say each, like myself and my partners have areas that we know we stay local. It's really those 5 states. I guess it sounds like a lot, but the reality of that is most guys try to be like national lenders. So we're in a small space, in my opinion, but we're all experts in that area. So I have multiple partners that we deal with, my Maryland partner knows the Maryland area very well. I know my Pennsylvania and Jersey area well. So it really comes down to just knowing the ins and outs. But for the most part, it's all fairly similar. And there's nothing that's too strikingly different in any of the areas that you go out. That's a really different lending law or something like that. It's pretty similar across the board.
Gotcha. So you talk a lot about, we did talk a lot about, ego and how you're able to spot it and see it in different people in terms of, who you come across in the real estate industry. Is there anything for you as you've gotten more involved in investing and evolved as an investor? What do you look for in terms of people you partner with, in terms of characteristics that you think make up a successful investor, or things that you think people should avoid? I know we talked a bit about it in terms of what you've learned yourself, but is there anything else that you think if you looked at other people in terms of their strengths and your strengths and their weaknesses versus yours, that you're like, okay, this is someone I could be compatible with in terms of partnering? Because a lot of people do that as investors.
Right. So partnering is really like, people underestimate it. I've definitely had quite a few partnerships over the past 12 years, multiple different partnerships in different businesses, and learned a whole lot about what I want in a partnership, what I don't. And I usually, a couple of things: low headaches, clear division of responsibility are two things I would look for. And it's real. I mean, it's like a marriage without the sex. Like, that's what it is. Like, you call it whatever you want, but like, you're going to face, it's not about, when you have your honeymoon phase, whenever you overlook each other's flaws and the things that would normally bother you don't bother you, whatever it may be. But as that settles in and the excitement phases down, you get into the day to day, you're really going to find out who one another, who you are. And when you attach money as the primary focus, it's heavily emotionally driven for many people. So You're going to see the extremes of individuals. So, a lot of people just enter partnerships very, haphazardly, or they just want to get into a partnership, or they think they need a partnership, or they're trying to fulfill something. Maybe they're scared of something on their own outright. Being confident in yourself and making sure that the partnership enhances, the business or relationship. Like 1 + 1 has to equal 4, not 2. So, but if you have any indication that the individual, you wouldn't marry them, and I say that like not in the traditional term. Just if you simply would, if you wouldn't marry this person because you're going, hey, this person is highly volatile. When you get involved in this, and I'm not a volatile person. I'm a really easygoing person. So this is going to be, totally not a good mesh. You have to understand, like, look at what the hardest part of yourself and that person could potentially be, because you're going to experience that in the partnership. Yeah. And if you're okay with that, and if that's okay with what you're trying to do, you're good. Like you'll make the partnership work. And if you both have, unique skill sets, that one person does one thing, one person does another thing, and with little to no overlap, you can be in a very beneficial one. Now, I have had multiple variations of partnerships that, and I take full responsibility for any of them that did or didn't work out. So, it's something that I could change, or I could have avoided, or I could have enhanced. But it's been a learning experience to understand what I truly want or what makes a good partnership. I would say not, but yeah, the less headaches, if you have a lot of headaches and you're in a partnership and you're constantly fighting with your partner and there's a lot of tension or underlying issue with your partner, I can tell you right now, it is not. Do yourself a favor and have no partnership. You'll feel so much better. And then if you find a partnership where it's just like, just smooth flowing, which I have now, and hard money bankers, it's just there's no headache, there's no fighting. Sometimes there's some tension, but it's all creative problem solving. It's like,
right, yeah, exactly.
Very rarely is it.
Yeah,
yeah. It's like we're working together, not against each other, and it works out nicely.
Yeah, well, I think that it's a great analogy to kind of take a look at anybody you're going to partner with, because money, I think, is definitely one of probably the most stressful things in any relationship. But you look at someone, and if you wouldn't be friends with them, you wouldn't marry them, date them, then why on earth would you invest money with them? So I think that makes a ton of sense. So thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
So I'm curious if there anything, that you look at in terms of tools or resources now that you use to keep up with your knowledge of investing. You said that you've got a pretty good finger on the pulse of the market. So, is there any specific tool that you go back to, or publication, or anything like that or website that you use to kind of keep your finger on the pulse then?
For finger on the pulse, honestly, it's just about being in the game. I'm always, I'm always in my MLS system. Always look. I've seen. I mean, I don't know how many. I'll probably do 30 or 40,000 comps this year. Or no, actually, I know how many I'll probably do. That's an overstatement. Let me think. Probably like. Probably like 3 or 4,000. I'll see probably 3 or 4,000 deals this year. So, being able to see that kind of spectrum of like properties, it keeps my finger on the pulse. Like I know what I want to see. I have repetition in my skill set of, being in the MLS. So the MLS system is by far the most important part of it, really any real estate investor's business. And if it's not, and you're not comfortable with it, or you're not using it, you're taking huge risks. So the MLS system, as far as like keeping up with any other information, I don't really. Everything else is somebody else's opinion, right? So I don't really read articles on why, such and such big name is thinking the market's going to do this or that. That's everybody. I can find just as many big names saying the complete opposite. It's really about staying in the game, in your local market, and understanding what's going on with it, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense in terms of we're in a huge age of information right now. And sometimes you hear the term, fake news, or this is false, or this and that. It's hard to make sure that you're getting the right information, in addition to not even just this is fake. Is it correct? Is it accurate? Or is this someone's opinion? So I think that definitely makes a lot of sense in looking at, where can I find the best information? Where can I find reliable information? So it's kind of, I think, a good idea to keep things limited in terms of not always going out there and trying to find a bunch of different things, unless it's something that you really are looking to expand your knowledge on, of course, but or get different opinions on. But yeah, no, I agree with you on that. And just because I'm, probably not the most well versed in the markets and things like that. What exactly is an MLS system? Could you just explain?
Oh, an MLS system is so if you're like a realtor or an investor, it's a centralized system where like any realtor that sells or any property that's bought or sold goes on public record, and so it's in like a computerized system. It's basically like a private version of like Zillow. That's really, like it's going to be way more accurate, way more functional. It's where all the realtors put their properties. They're constantly in that. If you ask realtors for like a CMA, which is like a comparative analysis of like your local market, they'll send it from their MLS. So that's where I get all my data from. It's inside the MLS system.
Gotcha. I'm a big Zillow girl. I like to, especially right now in this working from home and being in my childhood bedroom living with my mom. I've just been like loving Zillow right now. So that's
sure. It's a place to start. Like you can look at it, get a feel. But I always tell people if you're going to start throwing money down on properties, make sure you have the MLS. Like get real comfortable in it, because without it, I couldn't do this business. Like it's that important to me. And I know, and I have access to Zillow too. It wouldn't work.
Gotcha. So, in terms of going back all the way to the beginning of, your experiences, Ian, was there anything else besides, reading the excerpt from Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or anything early on or any person early on that kind of informed the way you started to look at money? Or was it just something that naturally developed? Or I'm just curious, like what was the thing that made you say aha, even as like a little kid growing up and that sort of thing?
I mean, my family's always been, money's always been I didn't know this till like later in life that certain people didn't look at money the way I looked at it. My family's always looked at it. It's just treated with a tremendous amount of respect and responsibility, and not afraid of it. Definitely not. There's no fear of money, because I understanding it, how it works. All these things. Like, it was an open conversation. Like we never had problems talking about money, liking money, loving money, whatever. It was, I've come to find out later in life that a lot of families it's a topic you don't talk about, or it's something you don't know about, or it's scary. I'm like, nah, like it's just a tool that enhances your life. And so I just always looked at my family's always looked at it differently. My father was an entrepreneur. He built his own insurance agency, and then my mother and her family was extremely good at managing or money in general. And then I'm sure, I know at some point, maybe really want to ask like a childhood question like that. I know there was some sort of value I used to place on people based on what I thought their net worth was, so then therefore I think I placed it on myself, and I've had to unravel that kind of statement. But and it sounds like, wow, that sounds like a pretty bold statement, but think about it. Somebody walks into a room and they're worth $100 million, and everybody in that room knows they're worth $100 million. And everybody else in the room makes normal salary, whatever. It's just that money is like a celebrity amount of money. Well, you're going to look at that person differently. You're going to treat them differently. So, but why, right? They could be a jerk. They could be anything, but you're going to look at them in a different kind of light. So I used to probably do that more than the average person at probably a young age. And therefore felt when I had money that I had probably more self-worth at the time. And now it's certainly morphed in what it has become to me. Like it's definitely has no value to who I am. But it's definitely, I would really recommend anybody that doesn't talk about money a lot or doesn't understand it or fears it, like get right with that kind of stuff if you're really going to go after money, because it's really a fantastic thing. It's really, there's absolute abundance of it in the world. There's no shortage of it. You just have to know how to look, how to use it, what to do with it. And it's not that complicated. The concepts are not that complicated. So much of it is just what the emotional charge is for most people behind the money. And so from a very young age, my family's always been very open and comfortable with it.
That's great to hear. I mean, a lot of what you said kind of resonated with me in that I think I grew up where it was definitely a taboo topic. And I'm grateful that I get to host this podcast because I get to talk to people like you who are able to kind of give me a little bit more insight on things that, I just have been like, oh, well, I didn't think about it that way, or I majored in theater. I was just resigned to the fact that I was never going to make money, that sort of thing. So I think, especially for a lot of new, younger investors, people like myself who might come from different backgrounds and are now just looking at this as an option for themselves to start to build wealth, I think that it is kind of a good way to look at it. And I also like the point that, we all growing up admire celebrities or this and that for things that they have. So I don't think that, I definitely don't think that that's sort of a vapid thing to look at somebody and be like, oh, this person is $100 million, this and that, or, Justin Bieber is attractive, like that sort of thing. I think how to get that? He's got the money to do that. So I think that it's a really interesting way that you frame it. And I like the way that you frame it. So it's definitely nice for me, especially to get to talk to people like you who definitely say, take that fear away. These are the things that have made it accessible. These are the things that have made me successful. So thanks for sharing all that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So is there anything in terms of just even for fun, any interesting books? We're all, we've been either working from home or adjusting to a new normal at this point. Are there any interesting books or anything interesting that you've watched, either a movie, television, anything like that, that may have gotten you to pick up on any tool or lesson from them that you may not have thought, oh, this kind of crosses over to what I do in business, or, is what you do for relaxation or entertainment kind of separated from what you do for work?
I mean, the biggest pivotal stuff in my life right now is probably very spiritual stuff. So, and it has a lot to do with my day-to-day business because it's a big part of what I do. But, there's certainly some books that have enhanced my spiritual outlook in life. And I think it's been great to do that. I spent a lot of time focused on that end of my life. So, and then I bring that into business, but I don't know, that's a different, that is not a trip that the average person, probably listening to this would be interested in, or it's probably pretty far out there, but there's some
people, sorry to, interrupt, but a lot of people have actually said that, Ian, that they've, turned to, people have been meditating more, this and that, like, especially guests who have come on this podcast. So you're actually not alone if that's a big
okay. That's good. Yeah. That's great. I mean, I think it's really, it's really great for people to, if they want to do that, take that path. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, things that are real, things I think, something that is very real is like the law of attraction and stuff like that. And not just, the sensationalism of what Oprah put on TV. Like if you really dig into it, understand it, and learn it, there's a lot of resources out there about it. And getting, I kind of realized, I forget what point in life I realized, after building a few businesses and doing certain things, that I started to recognize that other people maybe weren't doing, or I'm like, why don't you just do it like that? Or people wouldn't have the confidence to do something, or I'm like, why? Like, what, so, and I started to realize like, oh, I've been kind of doing this stuff, not the most polished version of it, but I've been doing this along the way and I started to really kind of like look into that kind of stuff of like law of attraction and understanding like manifestation and stuff like that. Cause I guess it was very comfortable for me to kind of, I would say comfortable, but it was okay for me to look into because I was like, oh, I've done this in various forms. Let me learn how to get better at it, or let me learn how to, so I think the hardest part for a lot of people with that kind of stuff is like, well, does it work? Is it real? That sounds like magic. That sounds like, but it's not. And I usually, if I were to explain it in like super simple terms, it would be like, when you order a sandwich at a restaurant, like you're literally using the law of attraction and you're just completely underestimating it. Right. So you're going, okay, I'm going to put in my order. I'm going to wait here and then it's going to come back to me. And it's just going to appear out of thin air. Like that's what you're doing. Or, a better one in business, when I kind of like think of it in my own mindset, is like marketing in general. So, the hardest part of like law of attraction is that like thinking about the technology of the universe that works to have these universal laws apply. But if you were to look at it from just a sheer business standpoint, a marketing perspective, I send out flyers, I send out emails, I do a podcast, whatever it may be. I don't really think then about what's happening behind the scenes to eventually get the phone call. Like maybe somebody calls me from this because they referred it to that person, to that person, to that person. I don't know what the universe is lining up to bring that marketing call back in, but it's going to happen. So those are just some areas that I think everybody does it as like they participate spiritually and in the manifestation process, but they don't give themselves the credit for doing it or recognize it because it's just so second nature. And I think those are huge, eye-opening, things that I'm extremely appreciative and grateful for to have been kind of awakened to and understand in my life.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds awesome. I have a couple of friends who focus on neuroplasticity and rewiring your brain so that you are actively forcing yourself to think positively and start every morning meditating and clearing things out. And
for sure.
And I just see so many positive results in people who are allowing themselves to take that mental well-being into play and take into stock. And those people are, to me, I think some of the most successful people. So I think that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
So is there any way, you talk about the law of attraction and, from a marketing standpoint, what you put out there, is there any way that you like to give back to the community, whether it's your investment community or your local community in that way? Or is it something that you're focused on in a different mindset? Or I'm curious about, is there any ways that you like to give back or that you try to give back to your investors?
Yeah, a lot of that. I don't really like to it's weird. It's kind of like a weird, giving back is like a weird concept because but they're talking about it. I just like to do it. I just like to just do it, anywhere from, it could be anything from, we do like a promotional stream for something like a good cause, or, I always drive around with like bags of supplies and money for in case I'm in Philadelphia and I stop and there's somebody that's in need, on the side of the road or something, I'll give it to them. So like it's anything that, anywhere from that to that, and I've done things in my past that have been but I always think in that regard I can always do more. I don't think you can ever do enough to help other people. So, but I'm always, I'm very giving is always much more satisfying than receiving. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And I think that, it is definitely giving back and charity and all that stuff is it's such a loaded thing, but it is such a beneficial thing. So I think that that's awesome that you do that. That's awesome. So As we wind down, some of the things that we ask, or one thing that we really ask all of our guests, Ian, is what would you say are your keys to building wealth and unlocking your financial freedom? I know we've touched on a lot of these things throughout our interview together, but this doesn't have to be a financial thing. What's something that has informed the way that you look at the way that you define success?
How do I define success?
Yes. So what would you say are, your keys to building wealth and unlocking your financial freedom? And, when we say financial, this doesn't necessarily have to be financial, but, what have been, your keys, if you could summarize all these points that we brought up down to like one or two major things that you really look at that have driven you throughout your whole career?
My drive was always money for a very long time, but as far as like the pinnacle of success, it's for anybody, it should be staying in a state of happiness and joy, like however that may come, is really, I think, what we're all after. And being in that state of mind for as long as you can be at any given time is a very powerful place to be. And so that, to me, like if I saw somebody that had no money, all the money in the world, whatever, right, and if they were in that state of mind, I'd say they found success. That drives me to always, I'm always focused on getting my mind to be, because everything's perspective. So no matter what happens, you can always be in the right perspective of towards joy or towards success, in the way that like, okay, like, one person looks at a scenario where, hey, they lost a bunch of money and they're freaking out and they can't let go of it. And their perspective is like end of the world, disaster, where the other person that loses in the exact same scenario loses money and goes, oh, I could easily like triple that money back because now I learned the lesson of how not to do this. There's two completely polar opposite perspectives to be in, and one will make you happy and satisfied, and the other will lead to turmoil and a lack of building. So remaining in that success and happiness position mentally, I think, or joy and happiness position mentally is really the day-to-day focus. Leading up to that moment, I'm just always focused. Like I don't,
yeah.
And I say focus, I used to probably work a lot harder than I had to. Now I focus on the right stuff, I think. But like, I just focus is, but I also don't believe in, this is going to sound bad, but I don't believe in hard work in the way that, like, not to be lazy, but, looking back, I did a lot of work that I probably didn't have to do. If I worked smarter, more focused on the right stuff, probably would have been a lot less headache and more efficient at it. But I guess that's part of the learning curve too. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't think that that's a bad thing. I think the idea of work smarter, not harder is something that a lot of people should probably adopt, but where I think almost like kind of trained to think that we need to work harder in order to be more successful.
Yeah, I think that's dying. I hope that whole like badge of honor because you worked 20 hours a day and sent that email out at 2 a.m. I hope that whole world is on its way out. Like you can be just as efficient and effective, and it doesn't mean you're lazy or you can be whatever. I call it whatever you want, but like, do you think Bill Gates works 24 hours a day? The dude, he probably works like 30 minutes a day and makes more money than any of us will ever see. So, there's something very backward. I think it's just more built for like the middle class working methodology, because the upper class and elite rich, their currency is the middle class's time. So the longer if they can get you triple clocking your time and create essentially a culture around exorbitant amounts of work. I know it's like really intense in like Japan and stuff like that, where we have huge drinking problems, in South Korea, I think, as well. I think those kind of scenarios really lead to cultures being built, but the elite aren't working that hard. That's how it works. Mm-hmm. So
exactly. And it's the idea of, I'm a firm believer in those things too. It's like work smarter, not harder, quality versus quantity for sure. So I think that it's definitely, I agree with you, something that I hope is on its way out. The idea of you need to work hard in order to be successful is, I think, such a loaded phrase. Like definitely hard work is valuable, but sometimes it's unnecessary in that, you're working too hard toward, and that leads to not being able to focus. I think I agree with you in that focus is such a huge
huge tenet to, I think, building success. So thank you. I think this is really helpful. I think I liked hearing a lot of what you had to say, just, from my own perspective, but I think a lot of our listeners are going to tune in and resonate a lot with what you have to say, Ian.
Sure. I appreciate it. Anything to help. So that sounds good. I hope I can help.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for, sharing everything that you've shared with us today. I really can't wait to get this out to our listeners. So one final question, though, before we go is, how can people reach you if people are listening and want to get in touch with you? Do you have a website or social media that listeners can use?
Right. A lot of people will email me. So my website is Hard Money Bankers with an S. So Ian, or just hardmoneybankers.com. My email is Ian, just my first name, IAN, at hardmoneybankers.com. If you want to call me, it's 215-839-3271.
Awesome. Thank you again so much, Ian, for being here. We really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. So be on the lookout for more upcoming events with CamaPlan featuring Ian and Hard Money Bankers. But until then, thank you, everyone, for joining us again this week on the road to financial freedom. You can tune in next week to hear more from our experts who have paved their roads to financial freedom, or call CamaPlan today to learn more about how you can start to take control of your future wealth. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all for tuning into our podcast. We truly hope that you're enjoying your ride along the road to financial freedom so far. If you like what you've heard and learned, or if you want to hear more about certain topics that we may have already covered or have yet to cover, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. We would love to hear any feedback from you so that we may continue to make our podcast the best that it can be for you, our listeners. Thanks again, everyone, and remember, tune in next week to the road to financial freedom.